You're live.
Sure.
No, well, that's good. There's a word about childhood deaths that came out, and their top recommendation is about graduated license in Vermont. So given our interest in safety, I wondered if we.
We can definitely take that up. After yesterday, and I know we're live, but I'm going to say it anyways. They thought there was a little conflict in the numbers and everything. I don't see, and I can say this, when you go from 60,000 stops down to 40 and you've cut in half the number of tickets you're writing, but you had no policy change. I don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't get the numbers in relationship to the conversation about the policy. So I think we need to spend a little time on this.
Agree. Thank you.
That's why I asked the question of staffing.
Right.
Can you blame it on staffing or is it?
Well, and then I think the follow-up to that is how many man hours are you putting into, or not, excuse me, how many staff hours are you putting into enforcement? You know, those two questions together, it just doesn't feel, it doesn't come together to me in the feeling. So
I'm hoping the data we get will help give us some more. So thank you for asking for that.
yeah. Michael, we went live and I asked where's Michael? And so I think they sent out a survey.
I'm sorry, I was in Elcar and
So
Lose track.
we are the Senate Transportation Committee. We are going live. It's Thursday, the 15th of January. And we are here to talk about reduction of fluoride in the state waters with Michael O'Grady from I see he's the deputy chief of legislative affairs. So we're very honored to have you here.
thank you for having me, Chair. I see your sense of humor, so it's so again, it's Mike O'Grady, Legislative Council. Last year, you saw a bill that is very, very similar to this, if not exactly the same. Created a chloride contamination reduction program at the Agency of Natural Resources to provide voluntary training to commercial salt applicators. And once those commercial salt applicators were trained and certified, when they were applying salt or salt alternatives and there was potential damages from their application, they would have the affirmative defense that they were not liable because they were following the BMPs. That was in H319 as it came out of Senate Natural Resources, which was a bit of a miscellaneous bill. And it went to the floor, but ultimately was sent back to committee, and parts of that bill were cut up and sent into other bills. But this program was not attached to other bills. So Senator Watson decided to introduce this as a standalone. And so that is what is in front of you today, what was in H319, but didn't get to a vote on the floor of the Senate.
High level, I'd like to go through the bill. If you could do that just from a very high.
Sure. So,
But the area that we were concerned about was municipalities' access to grants and the ability to, so I'm hoping that there's something in there about that.
Before you start, can you tell us if they changed? Because also when we left here, I thought you had stuff in there about what it would cost for municipalities to cover their salt files if they're uncovered.
Yeah,
Wasn't that this bill?
I maybe inartfully,
Okay.
but that was what I was trying to get at in my question. If it
Did that all get into the new bill or is
so there is no longer a cover requirement in the bill. When I was in here last year with the first version of the bill, there was a cover requirement.
Yep.
And there was concern about the municipal ability to pay for the cost of that. And there was conversation about grants or other funding for that. But the cover requirement has been removed. What it replaced it is a report by ANR on how many facilities are covered, how many are not covered, how many are within 100 yards of a surface water, and what it would cost to cover and or move those facilities that are in proximity to a water. No mandate, no need for funding because there is no mandate. And that's.
Well, I think we should go through, because I will articulate my concern. The town of Elmore on Lake Elmore had a salt and sand pile uncovered for years within a few, within yards of Lake Elmore. The pressure was on them to do that. The reason they didn't move quicker, and they now have a covered pile that is out of the range and all, but the reason they didn't move for more than a decade is they couldn't, the small town just could not afford to do it. And it was, and they started saving money and they went over, and I was through no attempt of themselves, but you've got a town with, 1,800 people that, it was a heavy lift for them. So from that, anything to move down the road that helps set the priority of any public funds to go help these towns deal with that, I think they need to be, at least I'm interested in making sure that they're toward the top of the priority list.
I fully understand that 20 plus years ago, EPA rolled out a rule that would have required coverage of all municipal salt sheds. And there was like nationwide resistance. There because of the cost, because of there was ambiguity in the rule too. And EPA had to repeal that rule because it just, I think there would have been a municipal riot, but but that is a concern, and I understand that concern. That would be a future discussion after this report comes back about whether or not you as policymakers wanted to say, we believe that coverage is necessary and therefore we will either fund it or not. That will be a future decision. But I do want to provide context for why this bill is even here. So you all know, I believe, about the fact that the state has water quality standards, and those water quality standards require that the waters meet certain uses, and that the ANR is required by the Federal Clean Water Act to go out and assess waters every 2 years to determine if the waters are meeting the water quality standards. Increasingly, waters of the state are becoming impaired by chloride or are close to impairment by chloride. And when the water is impaired by a substance, there's supposed to be a plan that's implemented to bring that water back into compliance with water quality standards. So for waters that are impaired by chloride, the source is application of road salt. And there are waters, Colchester, largely in Chittenden County, that have to do something to address that chloride contamination. The Agency of Natural Resources believes that this is a step towards that. And hopefully, if this is implemented widely, they won't have to go to a mandatory plan. But if it's not, if this isn't implemented or if it's not successful, there might need to be a mandatory plan. Likely in those areas, the watersheds of the impaired water. So Colchester might have to have certain requirements for salt application in proximity to the impaired water. South Burlington, as I said, that's what you're trying to avoid, that mandate, by implementing a voluntary program that actually gives the commercial applicator a benefit or two. And not just the applicator, the owner of the property where the applicator is applying salt. So that's the concept here. It's not, it's really intended to address a water quality issue without going to a full mandated plan.
I totally get that, but I would say to you, I think every town in the Champlain watershed is going to, we're headed to that same
I
peak. And I totally think that the Colchesters and the South Burlington need some help, but they have a lot more resources than up. When you get into the upstream of that, when I get to the Elmores of this world, which struggled to do the right thing, I've also got towns like, small towns like Eaton, and they just don't have the resources. So.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding of what we did last time, this is voluntary. So this is not a required thing that any of the applicators have to do. This is kind of the start of it.
It's still voluntary.
Okay, so that I think.
No, I totally get that, but in all of this, we're moving more and more and more toward the place where there's less. Well,
My hope is that ultimately we could see a municipal cap on liability as well. That's another, but that's not in this bill.
It's not in this bill, but it's related to a provision in this bill. There's a provision in the bill that gives municipal salt applicators who complete training, the local roads training.
Mhm.
This requires that the local roads training have requirements about salt application, and once a municipal employee completes that training, that municipal employee would receive an affirmative defense.
Excellent.
But that's not what the league, that's not the league's policy goal. I believe the league is looking for that limitation on liability, similar to state limitation on liability for municipalities and municipal employees. This is not that.
Okay, yeah, I would just say that concept would, I think, alleviate some of the concerns that some communities have about moving forward with this. At the same time, I'm in favor of this bill fully, with or without that. So it should be explored separately. But is the ask of us as a committee are we taking possession of this bill?
No,
or are we
that's why
reviewing it?
he's here.
Okay, we're just reviewing.
We're gonna review it and make sure that it went, because I know we particularly do have an interest in the municipalities and their salt and sand piles, and so why don't we just briefly go through this, and if anybody asks, we can say legitimately we went through and reviewed the bill.
Just a couple quick questions.
Go ahead.
You might answer it during your review. So I would think that ANR has information on where the fluoride is becoming a problem. And if you could provide that, and are there trends so that we can see how close we are getting to
Other trends in
the chloride concentration in the
sure.
impacted waters?
Sure.
So that's just one question I would have. And you don't have to answer all these now, but just, and then,
Well, I can give you a list that A&R has, and they list all the impaired waters that don't have a cleanup plan.
Okay,
And they list what the water is impaired for. So that, and it's not, the full water, it's not looking at, the entire Winooski River, et cetera. It's segments or tributaries of those larger waters. And it will tell you exactly what the water is impaired by, and chloride is on there. It's on there.
okay. And then, I'd like to know, there are probably towns who are doing a great job of limiting the chloride. I would suspect that they would.
Well, I mean,
It would be nice to know, if, like, Winooski has really amazing trucks that have the kind of chloride that, the spreader that is much more sophisticated than other towns. So I think it'd be good to know of towns that are doing things the right way or the appropriate way that protects the environment.
I will have to talk with people at the agency about that. I don't know who would be the best resource for that.
Okay,
So since we've got like 14.
okay,
Why don't we just briefly, from a very high level,
Sure.
go through this and we can review it. I will say, it's not been my intention to take the bill in here, but if there was an overwhelming interest in here, that could change, but it would have to, the intention is to get us up to speed with this.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I'll just start on page 2. The purpose of the bill is to create a standard of care for salt application of salt and salt alternatives that provide safe conditions for pedestrians and motor vehicles while also improving water quality. There's a definition section going on from page 2 to page 3. I won't spend a lot of time on this. These definitions are pretty intuitive. Apply salt means to apply salt or salt alternatives for de-icing or dust control. Commercial salt applicator, somebody that applies salt for compensation. Master commercial applicator, somebody that can train others in their organization. Salt is pretty much every type of chloride you can think of. Salt alternative is every kind of thing that's not salt that's used for de-icing or dust suppression. Transportation infrastructure construction project, that is something that you probably know better than I do, but it's construction of roadways, parking lots, or sidewalks, or other construction activities. Why is this definition in here? Because they are exempt. They are not going to be considered when you're looking at application of salt standards, because they have either the state has their own standards or there's a different need for application of salt for salt alternatives around those facilities. Moving on page 3 to page 4, you see the establishment of the program at the Agency of Natural Resources, but they are required to consult with the Secretary of Transportation in establishing the program. And on page 4, lines 1 and 2, you will see that the program is a voluntary education, training, and certification program for commercial salt applicators regarding the effective and efficient application of salt and salt alternatives, provided safe conditions, while also improving the water quality of the state. As part of the program, page 4, line 7, the agency establishes best management practices for application of salt for salt applicators, and they will consult with the Agency of Transportation because the AOT already has their own standards. So they'll try to basically align them. And those standards will address measures or techniques to increase efficiency of applicability of salt and salt alternatives, the standard for when and how salt and salt alternatives are applied in order to prevent them entering waters, page 5. They also need to look at salt alternatives that are cost effective and less harmful while maintaining salt safe condition, and whether and how to implement equipment to calibrate, monitor, or meter the application, and when sand is a more appropriate alternative for de-icing or dust control, particularly in regard when application of sand will be less harmful to waters. They will establish record keeping requirements for those certified salt applicators. They will create and circulate a model form for record keeping. They will establish requirements for certification, establish requirements for testing. You're now on page 6, top of the page, and any other requirements deemed necessary. They offer the training to the commercial applicator. They offer it, not required. Upon completion of the training, the commercial salt applicator shall be designated a certified commercial salt applicator. The term of that certification is for 2 years, page 6, line 7 and 8. Business that employs multiple commercial salt applicators can get that master salt applicator certification, and that master can then train people within that organization, provided that they are complying with the best management practices.
So in this, the secretary refers to A&R,
Yes,
okay? And so all of the training that is viewed in this is A&R's training.
it's an A&R program. You will see later on that A&R will have the discretion to implement the training through their own staff or through contracting with the vendor. And I don't know if you talked to New Hampshire's got this program. And New Hampshire, they started off with a vendor, but then they transitioned to state staff. I think you can do it either way. And so there are alternatives for how the training is provided.
Okay, just keep going. I'll hold.
Page 6, line 15, the certified salt applicator submits an annual summary of their total winter salt usage. And then the Secretary of Natural Resources established methods to estimate and track the amount of salt applied by the certified applicators. The Secretary may revoke a certification for violation or non-compliance with the certification or the requirements. And then I think you can move down to page 7, line 9. This is the affirmative defense. Now, when this bill was first introduced, it was a limitation on liability. It said that the applicator would not be liable, shall not be liable. And there were concerns, especially from the bar, the defense bar, and the insurance bar, and other attorneys who were taking away a right of action for those people who are harmed. This doesn't take away that right of action. That person that's harmed can still bring that right of action. But what happens is there's an affirmative defense. An affirmative defense means that if the defendant can show that certain criteria or conditions are met, then they qualify for non-liability. They won't be considered liable. So affirmative defense, and that's what the certified commercial applicator would receive. And so page 7, line 10 through 13, a certified commercial salt applicator or an owner, occupant, or lessee of the real property maintained by that certified applicator shall have an affirmative defense against a claim for damages resulting from a hazard caused by snow or ice. If the claim damages were caused solely by snow or ice, and any failure or delay in removing that hazard is the result of the salt applicator following the best management practices that they were certified to follow. Now, that affirmative defense doesn't apply when the civil damages are due to gross negligence or reckless disregard of a hazard. Gross negligence is negligence that is the failure to exercise even a slight degree of care. Now, if you're following the BMPs, you are not triggering that standard. And reckless disregard is basically that you know that there's a high risk of harm and you deliberately proceed anyway. Again, if you're following the BMPs, that's not going to be a standard that's going to apply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a really important section of the bill for me because I remember it popped over to judiciary and got swirled around there for a bit and then came back. My understanding, like just in layman's terms, is the concern that if someone joined this program and then undersalted, that if that person like didn't actually provide enough salt to make sure that a stretch wasn't slippery for someone, that if first of all, that's unlikely to happen if they're following the guidelines.
Right. Remember,
because they're trained. And on top of that, if they did it incorrectly, if there was a risk, they would still be held liable. So someone who maybe got hurt, like, this isn't going to increase the risk for someone in any way, is basically my understanding.
Right, and remember, you made a great point. The affirmative defense only applies when you are following the BMPs. If you are not following the BMPs, if you are not applying at the rates or the frequency or the locations, then you don't, that are required in the BMPs, then you don't receive the affirmative defense. Now, New Hampshire had a test case on this, and they had, it was more than affirmative defense there. They had the limitation on liability. And it will still be about facts, because the plaintiff there said that it was because they weren't following the BMPs there. And the applicator could show we were following all our BMPs. They had the big, nice trucks, right? And with the computer monitoring, and they could show all of that. But then they showed video of the plaintiff falling on the grass.
Oh.
And that's where the plaintiff got injured. Right? The applicator had no duty to treat the grass, right? And so there will always be facts in these cases that I can't imagine at this point. So to say that there will never be liability if they're following the BMPs, I don't know, because you can't make up some of these things.
We
I know.
so quick, yes, quick.
My concern is how does one that is following or thinks they are, and they're trained, following BMPs, prove that they were once they've solved it? I'm talking, and I'm thinking about the guy who plows driveways and solves commercial parking lots too.
Right. So in some respects, the larger companies are going to have an easier way to deal with that, because they will have the equipment. But A&R is also supposed to create a model form that the applicators that aren't using that equipment can use to track their applications. And tracking of that application is very important, because on page 8, line 4 through 12, in order to get that affirmative defense, you need to keep a record describing your activities, your application, when you're doing it, your rate, etc. And that is how you prove it. And I think to an extent, the trucks have GPS now. Like, it literally, you cross into this property and it GPSs, this is the property and it measures your rate, etc. You can probably do that beforehand on a form. You're like, this is the property I'm going to. I've calibrated my applicator to this rate, and I'm going at this rate across this. You could probably figure all of that out before you even go out to a property, and have that as a default when you go out.
It's good to know. And these are, so if someone's participating, though, it's again voluntary. So it probably isn't going to be the smaller shops originally. It's going to be the really big guys who can train their folks.
And that's a good point too. If you don't want to do it, you don't want to hassle. You don't need to do it.
Right. Let's get through this.
Page 8, line 1364. This is also a benefit that the certified applicator gets. They will be presumed not to be creating water quality issues under stormwater or direct discharges if they're following the BMPs. And then I'll just skip further. Then on page 9, line 8, section 1365, the Secretary of Natural Resources conducts an education and outreach program to commercial applicators about the availability of this program and the benefit of the affirmative defense, and to members of the public about the water quality issues and the issues that it can create for pets and wildlife from excessive application of salt.
So under this definition, commercial applicators would be towns too.
We're not gotten into the towns yet. Commercial applicators.
Let's go.
apply for
Let's keep going.
compensation. All right, but page 10, section 3, this is the report on coverage. Not a mandate, it's just A&R reporting back before January of 2027 after consultation with AOT, and they will tell you the inventory of facilities in the state used for storage of salt and sand mixtures, and salt alternatives, a number of facilities that are covered, number that are not covered and are within 100 yards of the surface water or drinking water, an estimate of the number of facilities that are not covered and are more than 100 yards from surface water or drinking water, and an estimate of the total cost to cover or move those facilities, and an annual amount of funding that we would be required to meet the timelines for covering or movement. So if you decided to have a coverage requirement in the future, you would know the universe and you would know the general estimate of what it will cost. Then you get to the municipal applicators, section 4, page 11, line 3, on or before November 1, 2027, A&R in collaboration with AOT identifies and makes changes to the Vermont local roads curriculum needed to support municipal salt applicators, including training on best management practices for spreading of salt or salt alternatives. A municipal salt applicator is an individual who applies or supervises others who apply salt or salt alternatives in the applicator's capacity as an employee or agent of the town or municipality. Does not include state employees. So the state employee applying salt on a state road that goes through the town, this is not applicable to them. They have their own program, they have their own liability protection. Notwithstanding any provision to the contrary in 24 VSA section 901A, that is the liability provisions related to municipalities. A municipal employee shall have an affirmative defense against the claim for damages resulting from a hazard caused by snow or ice if they completed the Vermont local roads curriculum, providing BMPs for spreading salt for salt alternatives in that calendar year.
So this is seen as the trainings that Vermont Local Roads does presently, adjusting what their curriculum is.
Yeah.
to deal with.
Yes. Concept is not, don't create a separate training program when there's already a training program.
Okay.
Now the criteria are the same as for the commercial applicator. The claim damages need to be caused solely by snow or ice. Any failure or delay in removing has to have been due to implementation of the BMPs, and then they get that
Okay.
affirmative defense.
And did AOT testify in natural resources about this?
Not this year, but last year. I'm just gonna call him DG because I can't pronounce his last name. DG was there, very involved throughout the whole process. Said that I don't want to characterize his testimony. They did not object.
Okay.
And then just as with the commercial salt applicator, gross negligence, reckless disregard removes the affirmative defense, and the municipal applicator needs to maintain records. And then last is about the training. The chair asked about before January 15, 2027, A&R shall solicit interest from third-party vendors for training and certifying commercial applicators. Secretary shall recommend to the General Assembly a fee to be charged either by the state or by a third-party vendor for certification of commercial salt applicators. Any fee has to be approved by the General Assembly. And this bill included the contingent funding, as I think 3 of you are on appropriation.
Yeah.
When you're creating a new program these days, you put this in so that at the end, when or if you don't have enough money, you those agency, this would be codified. It would be put in the books if it was passed by both houses and signed by the governor. But section 6 says that A&R would not have the duty to implement it. until they were received appropriations from the general fund for that purpose.
Last year, did they say what those dollars would be? Again, you know, it's reparations.
I can't recall because I think it had the contingent funding language in it and I don't think a number.
There was numbers and assets introduced, but not after.
Right. Right. So I will try to figure that out for you.
If anyone gets the appropriation, we can break that.
So I've heard little whispers about, ANR's role, or transportation's role in, the trainings. And so I'm gonna say this out loud. Wink, wink. If we as a committee could, get an email from the agency about their feelings about all of this and pass it around, we'll make a decision on whether or not we need anything more from you in that. But it would be nice if we had an email from, the agency on that position of local roads and how that fits together. And if it was sent to Megan and Megan sent it around to everybody.
Shall do you want me to send? I'm still.
All right, sorry, yeah, you've done well. We asked too many questions.
Yeah.
We're not enough. We need to move on. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Austin?
This is our. Good morning, my name is Jeremy, members of the committee. I'm going to quickly share screen here.
Okay,
Great. Good morning. I'm here to provide a federal transportation policy update. It's something that we like to offer the committee every year just to let you know what's going on in Washington. That varies from year to year. Sometimes it's an appropriations bill. Sometimes it's a standalone bill. Well, this year it's the really big bill. It's the reauthorization of the IIJA. The bill that's generally reauthorized every fifth year and provides a big chunk of the federal dollars that we get for highways, for public transit, for rail, and aviation. Just to quickly go over how this federal funding comes to us. For the transit and highway modes, it's rather simple. They're formula funds that are allocated annually over a 5-year basis. Predictable funding stream that allows us to plan for projects and services. Aviation and rail are almost entirely competitive grants. We have to apply for them. And if we're successful, we undertake projects. If we're not, you don't. It's that simple. So this chart illustrates in simple terms the continuum between these dedicated federal funds that we get for highways and transit, and then how we veer into the competitive nature of aviation and rail. So the current bill expires in September of this year. It's hard to believe that it's been close to 5 years already, but it's been that long. And the way that the transportation program is funded federally is a combination of the Highway Trust Fund that collects fuel taxes and also the general fund, because for the past 15 to 20 years, the Highway Trust Fund hasn't been collecting enough revenue to offset the outlays of the program. So the gas tax hasn't been raised, the federal one, since 1993. So to your point, Mr. Chair, it's no surprise that at some point that fund just couldn't keep up. The funding that does come to us comes in different buckets, particularly on the highway side, where we have to undertake specific activities. And for the federal government or for Congress, this kind of shows you, the priorities that they have when it comes to the dollars that are attached to these programs. At the top of the list is the National Highway Performance Program.
that's the funding source for the national highway system. So think of interstate bridges, culverts, reconstruction, all of that. Then you get into the surface transportation block grant program, which is the most flexible. That can cover literally anything that we want to do as long as it's highway or public transit related. Then you've got specific programs for safety, for grade crossings, the Metropolitan Planning Organization. The last two on this list were brand new, created in the IIJA. So the Carbon Reduction Program and the Protect Resilience didn't exist prior to that. They were added to the list of formula programs for the IIJA. And here you can see the dollar amounts that are associated with each of the programs. Kind of the point I want to highlight here is that we oftentimes forget that the IIJA was both a surface transportation bill, but it was also an economic stimulus bill. So what they did is they added a lot more funding to it than traditional transportation bills. Just the formula component of what we got under the IIJA was a roughly 35% increase over the previous 5-year bill. And the two highlighted programs that are circled, which consist of the NEVI program and a special bridge program, both came out of the general fund. And that's one of the things, I'd like to talk about today is what's going to happen when the IIJA expires, because I think we're generally familiar with one-time general funds. They're not recurring by definition. And here, for bridges in particular, the dollar amount is very high. That's an average of $45 million a year over 5 years for bridges. So I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what they're going to do in Congress, but there's some tough decisions that they're going to have to make as it relates to all the general funds that went into this bill, in addition to the general funds to shore up the highway trust fund. So one part of the general fund is simply there to keep the formula programs going. Another part were all these add-ons. The bridge program was one, but there was also 20 different new competitive grant programs inserted into the IIJA. So we're used to Tiger and Build and, some of the ones, the rail Chrissy program that have been around for a while, but 20 out of 26 were not around prior to the IIJA, mostly general funding. What happens to these programs? That's one of our concerns. Think of the electric buses that we purchased. Think of the bridge replacement in Reedsboro, the bridge replacement over the Winooski River. All of that competitive grant funding came out of these programs. And we're not sure what's going to happen. We don't have a lot of precedent for what occurs when general funds enter the surface transportation program, but we have a couple that can give us some glimpse in terms of what can happen. The first one was back in 2008, 2009, during another financial crisis where the state received about $300 million in one-time funding to get the economy going, right? Our unemployment rate was relatively high nationally, not just here. So what happened? We received that $300 million. We obligated them. We undertook the projects. We completed the projects, but that money disappeared, right? It never came back into the formula programs that we have. So one-time general fund.
But that, I need to make the point, like on the Irene money that came sometime later, those two chunks helped us pick up on a lot of bridges. But what we had was excess match money that had built up in the TIP bond fund to be able to do that. And we were able to draw down money that other states would have been eligible for, but they had to turn back because they weren't. So I think there's a lot for us to learn from that. And but we had some excess match money of our own that helped us.
Yeah, that definitely never hurts when there's funding, especially one-time funding. So to your point, Senator, there were no issues with obligating all these funds and expending them. It's that they disappeared afterwards. They never came back. So one time,
I totally, but in that particular case, if I'm doing a bridge that's gonna last 80 years, one-time money is very helpful in catching up when you have that. But it's not, when it's not good is when you do plowing of roads, which we have to do every single year. One-time money isn't really good for any of that.
Yes, absolutely. The second example that we can look at is the federal aviation reauthorization, which occurs separately from the surface modes, and was introduced in 2023. So we have another example. The best way to illustrate this is to just show the chart of what happens when Congress decides they don't want to maintain funding levels included in the IIJA. So the circle areas are the IIJA. And what happened was that the program for the airport improvement grants, which is the one we use for maintaining the state airports, effectively doubled during the IIJA. So then Congress had a decision to make in 2023, which is what do we do afterwards? And what they decided was one time is one time, and we're going back to where we were. So the chart goes back down to a IIJA level of funding. It was bumped up by about 19% or so, but nowhere near the amount that was included in the IIJA. And I'm not arguing that this is what's going to happen for the highway and public transit programs, but these are just two illustrative examples of what happens when there's one-time general funds that gets added to the transportation program federally. So we're very dependent on federal funds. That's no secret. Generally, depending on the grant amounts that we get, over half the transportation program is derived from federal funds, formula funds, grant funds, in some cases, disaster relief funds. So we're very sensitive to tweaks and changes in programs and funding levels. That can have a big bearing on our overall transportation program. So what are we looking at and monitoring, during this development of the new bill? Well, the first one is, are the programs that we got funding from the general fund related to NEVI and the bridges, will they continue? Important on a policy level, also important on a funding level. What's going to happen to the IIJA formula programs that weren't around prior to that? Carbon reduction and protect resilience. We don't know. And key to that too is what happens to the 20 new discretionary grant programs? Are they going to be around, since they were funded with primarily general fund dollars? So there's kind of two issues here. Is number one is the policy issue. Do they want to keep some of these programs? Philosophically, do they agree with them? The second is, how do you pay for all this stuff? Because the general fund, I don't think, was ever designed to continually add to the transportation program. So there's two levels of decisions that need to be made.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, thank you, Costa. That was a great presentation.
It was short because I wanted the engagement. I know there's a lot of questions when I do this.
Yeah, and I think my first question somewhat goes back to your previous slide. But there's been a lot of strange reporting about things that Sean Duffy has said about how funding will be allocated to towns, states based on fertility rates. And if you have a low fertility rate, you're going to get less transportation funding. And if you have a high fertility rate as a state, you'll get more. And I'm wondering, how accurate are those statements to what you're seeing, and what really, are we out in that ballpark? Like what's happening there?
Yeah, I don't know about fertility rates, but the prerogative for putting the transportation bill together is Congress's. Congress puts this bill together. There's obviously input from the administration going into that bill, but fundamentally it's going to be the transportation committees, and there's 3 of them in the Senate, 1 in the House, and also the body as a whole that's going to decide what goes into this bill. That's where the decision making will occur. So I don't know about specific statements made by the secretary, but the process for developing a bill is very similar to the way it happens here. We do it on an annual basis. They do it every 5 years. So there's elements of a lot of ideas from different stakeholders that end up in this bill. But specifically to the secretary's statements, I'm just not aware.
That's helpful. So it sounds like maybe to disregard some of the more ludicrous things we see him on video saying, in regards to this, that gives me a little bit of comfort because there has been some strange things that secretary said, that would negatively impact us.
The administration is going to have a lot of input into the bill.
Oh, okay.
No different than the stakeholders that come before this committee and try to influence the outcome of our own bill. So that.
Do you have any concern about political retribution? When we're seeing like money for childcare being taken from Minnesota or other like blue states, is that conversation happening openly?
The funding we get for transportation is primarily formula funding. The vast majority of it is actually laid out in the congressional act. So no different than, the funding levels that are included in our state transportation bill. It's done similarly in Congress. So once those funds are dedicated for a specific purpose, they're allocated to the states. There's not a lot of discretion. And you don't go before the appropriations committee for this bill the way you do other appropriations. Prior to 20 years ago, the appropriations process was not even a major activity because when the Highway Trust Fund had enough funds, the reauthorization bill itself was effectively an act of appropriations, right? When they're signing off on it with specific dollar amounts, those dollar amounts are there unless the appropriators decided they don't like the dollar amounts, right? So it's really that they're laying out the policies, the programs, and the funding in one single piece of legislation. They don't have to go back every year and discuss policy priorities and funding the way other federal programs do.
Thank you.
I think Angie.
What are the three transportation committees in the Senate? Is it aviation, rail, and the surface?
Yeah, so there's the Environment and Public Works Committee that deals with highways. There's the Banking Committee that deals with public transit, and then there's the Commerce Committee that deals with rail and aviation. I don't know the history of why it's split up into three different committees. Rail, we have to go back a couple of 100 years ago. I mean, it was an economic development activity. Transit, I think, is there because that committee also oversees urban development, and transit systems, for the most part, started in urban areas. So there's a lot of history, behind why they ended up where they did. But it's definitely more complicated on the Senate side, given that there's three committees that may not be aligned on, program priorities and funding levels.
So just give me a little history. They've done not real good. Well, Congress has had difficulty in the past renewing every 5 years.
Yes.
Like the last two renewals, how long did it take? And do we think the last couple, 2 or 3 renewals, did they do it in 5 years?
That's a wonderful point, Mr. Chair, because in my lifetime, I've been doing this for 25 years. I can't remember of a single bill that's actually been approved and signed into law on time. That they've all been late. And that has varied, I think, anywhere from 9 months to 3 years. It's easy for Congress to do that because all they need to do is pass a contract extension. They simply say, all right, we're going to continue the IIJA for another year. The problem, though, is that's going to be problematic this year because of all the general fund dollars that went into that. Those go away unless Congress says, yeah, we want them back in. And
but they can continue resolution to do that.
Yeah, that's the appropriation side. On the authorization side, it's called the contract. It does the same thing. It extends the program. The issue, though, is a lot of this general fund money went in there for stimulus purposes. It was to help us recover from COVID. And I'm not going to try to guess whether the appropriations committees are going to try to continue this funding, but remember, it was designed as 1 year, one-time general
And,
fund.
but this bill runs through to the beginning of the fiscal year, correct?
Yep, September 30th, and it's fine.
September 30th. And we will be, within, a month and a half of an election.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I had to do the math there, sorry. For Congress, I have, election.
Yeah, the elections will be in November and, so.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say my bet would be that they probably don't get it done.
No,
Yeah, so it's odd because in the past, there's never been that pressure to get it done, right? You can simply extend everything. Maybe include if the appropriators agree a little inflation factor, it was fine. This time around, though, we have a serious problem. A lot of this funding was tied to one-time general funds that are gonna start lapsing October 1st.
But given that if they tried to put together a bill that was gonna cut funding, which it will, and I was within weeks of an election, I might not want to cut money going back to my districts. So this is just me guessing out loud.
Yeah.
My guessing would be that we might continue for the next year as we are.
Yeah, and if that's the case, what do we continue with? That's the part that keeps me up at night. Does the general fund dollars, $225 million is a lot of money.
Yep.
It's equal roughly to a whole year of all the federal highway dollars we get coming into the state. And if that money's not there, it means you have $45 million less a year to work on bridges, and that could be problematic.
That's a worry. You duke it out, will you? Two. Which one wants to go first?
It might even, so we were concerned about having the match for the
Yep.
IIJ. Did we have the match? That might be a question for them.
Last year.
Yeah,
Yes, last year.
Okay, so we are fine.
Well, no, because.
No, as far as the IIJA.
We did the same thing to get the match last year that the feds are doing. We had 12.5 million in our bill of general fund to help us make that match
Right.
last year. And the question will be, will we come up with general fund match, or what will we do in the short term to produce enough money in state dollars to make the match? And my guess would be that I'm only bringing up, this is only my guess. The likelihood of them putting together at the federal level a bill that dramatically cuts states in an election year is probably not. I think they would try to avoid that. And so I would think that a year from now, it might be a different story. But in my mind, we should plan on at least for a year, things looking rather stable at the federal level, and then after that, so that's the amount that we might want to plan to be, but that's only guessing.
Okay, I'll follow up with the appropriations committee about this, just about our current year. FY 26.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what.
Yeah, this year we're fine.
Okay,
But that included general fund dollars that allowed us to make the match.
and the money in the institutions too,
Yeah.
so that, and cash.
Yep.
Okay. Thank
Go
you.
ahead and end.
We are still looking at a shutdown in January, right?
On the appropriation side, the transportation appropriation, I'm sorry, but the continuing resolution for transportation lasts through the end of January. If they don't do another continuing resolution or sign a full year appropriations bill, then we're technically back to a shutdown.
Yeah, January 31st or what?
Yeah, the end of the month. Yeah, and I say technically because some of these programs, by virtue of being funded with the general fund and being advanced appropriated, which is another unique aspect of the IIJ, continue. So the highway programs are largely unaffected, transit the same. It's usually aviation and rail that get affected more during a government shutdown, only because of the way the IIJ was put together.
But if there's a shutdown, the Congress won't be working on that reauthorization.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. The staff, I believe, is subject to the shutdown too, and so is a big part of the secretary's office. So you're correct, Senator. If they're not around, they're not going to be working on a bill of any kind.
None of us do very well without staff.
Although we do pretty good around here. We don't do much of that.
Well, we don't have, but if joint fiscal isn't around, the
Yeah, yeah.
appropriations,
Now we-
we don't move very fast.
Well, with Megan's,
Yeah, if Megan's not here, I'm not much of a scheduler.
no. Or in a.
Oh,
Well,
whoa, whoa, whoa,
That's not
whoa.
broad.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Limit. Right.
So I think you were on till 10:30.
10:15 is what the schedule says. I can answer any questions or glad to turn it off if your questions have all been addressed.
It might not be the last time that you have to show up here.
That's fine. I mean, if this progresses, it'll happen before the session ends, and I'm more than happy to come back and update the committee on any developments. This is critical stuff. It's $1.5 billion with the B. And it's over half of our transportation program. So we watch this very carefully and more than happy to update the committee on anything significant that occurs with this bill or its appropriation.
What are you expecting? What's your timeline or their time? What do you think their timeline is going to be? Put that way.
Well, as the chair noted, these things rarely go on schedule.
I
So
know.
they're going to work on them, and there's an elaborate and extensive hearing process that occurs with all four of the committees, 3 on the Senate side, 1 on the House. So there's a lot of lead time for us to know, generally what's going to be in this bill by the time they vote for it.
So, may I think, so with rail, passenger rail, I was surprised that the support continued, this year because it kind of went down. We weren't sure if it would continue, but then it has continued. So I'd be interested in if you, have any sense, you don't have to say it now, but because things are going to change. I mean, honestly,
are.
we aren't going to know until it happens.
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, but if you hear about rail,
Oh,
that
absolutely.
would be helpful.
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you.
All right, I think if we could be back here at 10:30.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Russell.
And we do have Utah on